Our next speaker has moved, I want to know the time frame, has moved 28 times across 9 states. I have questions like, are these small states or big states? How many times in each state? How many time over what time period this was? Were you being chased out by pitchfork? So we have lots of questions that we may or may not get answered from Lauren.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today, sharing some of the research I've recently done with Microsoft's worldwide public sector team on how to implement effective government platforms. Before I start, I'll answer one of those questions, which is the 28 moves is across 27 years. So lots of moving. And we'll leave the rest of the details a mystery for now. I'm Lauren Lombardo. I'm a graduate research fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School, where I've been studying technology policy and digital government and a variety of ways to improve the way that government delivers services using improved technical systems and modern technology. And as part of that work, one of the things I've spent a lot of time on is thinking about government platforms, specifically what should government platforms be thought of? How should governments think about using, developing, and implementing platforms? Is that different than private sector platforms? And once a government decides that they want to use platforms or platform ecosystems to better provide service delivery, how should they go about doing that? What are some of the big questions that they're going to have answers to? And who are they going to have to convince? So with that, I'll go straight into the presentation, and I am always happy and willing to talk about this. So if folks have questions or want to sort of chat more about this after the conference, I would be very interested in that and happy to do so. To start, this research really centered on the idea that governments need to have a shared language for what they think platforms are and how they would want to build platforms in a government ecosystem. Government platforms, I found in this research, are not really a new concept. In 1086, William the Conqueror documented the people and land and buildings of England and sort of created this national registrar that was used for tax purposes. And that's pretty broadly considered to be one of the first government platforms. Obviously not what we would think of as platforms today, but as we start to think about how governments implement more digital type platforms, some of the same principles apply. Having some core components that we build things on top of, having some reusable systems, and having real policy implications for how services are delivered and how people interact with the government. Also, governments can receive a lot of benefits from using platforms. We've seen this to be true in the private sector, but these benefits are really contingent upon how the platform is built. And it's really important for developers and policymakers to both have a similar and clear vision for what government platforms should look like. That would allow them to have really specific conversations about what the government needs and what should be built and how. So that being said, the first thing that we did in this research was really think about how we wanted to define what a platform is and isn't. And as part of that process, I found that a lot of times platforms are defined like this, as levels of abstraction. However, it became really clear that while thinking about platforms as a level of abstraction is interesting and frequently partially correct, it's not necessarily nuanced enough to help government decision makers and policymakers fully understand what they are going to build and implement. It just doesn't tell us enough about the governance choices that are made during this development phase, which is really important when you're thinking about the scale and the types of change management projects that a government might be looking at. Just further, not every abstraction tool should necessarily be considered a platform. Platforms, products, and services all abstract away some part of the technical infrastructure in some way. And platforms tend to have a really unique sort of feature where you also have complements that are built on top of that technical infrastructure and operate within this ecosystem and feed off of each other. And so as we're thinking about building government platforms at scale, it's also really important to understand how platforms can go beyond just abstraction tools. This led to a working definition of platforms as ecosystems of low and high variety components with specified and stable interfaces through which one accesses those components. This is a working definition of platforms that was used in this research that came from about 3 dozen practitioner interviews with folks who are building platforms in government or otherwise doing digital government work, and a pretty comprehensive literature review of relevant topics. We've come to this definition as sort of this 3-part ecosystem in which all 3 of these parts are equally as important for something to be considered a platform. And if something doesn't have one of these parts, frequently something might not have a system of high variety components or complements that operate within this ecosystem. It might be an abstraction tool, it might be a really interesting product that helps governments deliver services in really interesting ways, or otherwise is quite powerful. But for the purposes of this research and thinking through how governments should be building and operationalizing platforms, it's just not a platform. This definition isn't necessarily just about what is or isn't a government platform. It's designed to give us information and language that we need to have policymakers and developers work together to discuss how to build the desired features within these parameters. Just to expand on the definition a little bit to make sure it's really clear before going into the next part of the presentation, this definition sort of at a high level can be matched to a component of the iOS operating platform. There are low variety components, these highly reusable elements of an ecosystem like iOS that sort of don't change as frequently and are the core of the apps and complements built on top of it. There are high variety components, sort of the number of components that are peripheral, like applications, and there's a stable interface like the App Store through which applications can be marketed on this platform ecosystem. That's what makes the iPhone sort of a platform ecosystem in a way that is not true of other products and services. So using this definition of platforms, it's interesting to think about how governments might decide to build a platform ecosystem and what types of choices they would need to make to ensure that they're building something that's going to meet their end goal. There are ways to build something that has high and low variety components and stable interfaces in a variety of ways that meet not only the goals of the government, but also the real and perceived constraints that come with doing technical work in a government space. So the things that influence how a platform might be built in this way are first and primarily technical and policy choices. Some of these technical and policy choices are, should the interface be open or closed? There are a lot of decisions that go into why a government building a platform ecosystem might want to have an open or a closed interface. And that decision is going to ultimately dictate how powerful and useful that platform ecosystem is within the government. For example, a platform that is maybe built by the US Digital Service or by 18F might have a closed interface, not because they don't want to have an increasingly large number of applications or components that sit on top of their infrastructure, but because there are government structures that prevent them from allowing anyone to use their platform ecosystem to provide applications and complements to the government. You also would need to decide if you want this platform ecosystem to be mandatory or voluntary. Is the White House or is a centralized government agency going to build a sort of shared platform service like login.gov or the Federalist or something like this? And are they going to mandate that that platform ecosystem is used across the government? If it's mandated, then the way that you might build a government platform is going to come across differently and going to maybe follow different structures or technical choices than if it's voluntary and you're trying to entice folks to join and transition their existing government infrastructure to your platform. There's also a greater constraint on the ways that you might charge or fund your platform ecosystem. If you're just going to use it within a single department, that can be built differently and thought of differently than if you're going to try to use platforms across the entire government. So this is just an overview of sort of the variety of technical and policy choices that go into the decision to specifically build platforms within a government ecosystem. There's also this concept that you need to understand how you would operationalize a platform, which can be quite different in the government space than in the private sector space. In the government, the research showed that there were really three ways that folks operationalized platforms to be used in government. So you either see people using a platform ecosystem, meaning that they use it within a single department. Maybe this really just translates to someone moving over to AWS or Azure or some other type of platform that they either build or buy, but is pretty concentrated within a single agency or department or program. You could share a platform ecosystem, which really speaks to these shared services I referenced earlier, like login.gov or cloud.gov, where something is built either within a department or in a centralized area, but is really designed and meant to be shared across more than just one department. Or you could attempt to be a platform ecosystem, which is frequently referred to in the government space as government as a platform. The misnomer of government as a platform is that it should be the end goal for governments who are looking to use platforms as a means to service delivery. However, I feel that this is frequently not the best or the most correct way for a government to operationalize a platform approach. It frequently requires a much greater leap in technical capabilities and political power and influence, and doesn't necessarily, can prevent all of the benefits that could be achieved from having shared services, or even just from getting departments to migrate to AWS, which in some cases would be a great and a great increase in government service delivery. So all of that said, there really are three ways that you might operationalize the platform ecosystem that you choose. And whatever this operational strategy is, it's really going to dictate how the platform might be built. So government as a platform really needs to have an ease of integration for broader interpretation and adaptation across the entire government. You would want all departments and agencies to be able to access that infrastructure and that data and to build on top of it in a way that wouldn't be true if you were just going to migrate a program to the cloud or just going to try to get all departments to adopt the same login system like login.gov is attempting to. So what influences the technical choices you might make and the operational choices you might make when building a government platform? This is really, I think, what makes this technical work so interesting in the government space is because there are government structures that really create a different set of opportunities and strengths and weaknesses, and this all changes what's possible. Governments have to work within these structures when thinking about building platforms in the government, and it's important to figure out how these change what's possible and how that constrains what you're going to be able to build. For example, budgeting constraints, you might find it more difficult to identify funding for a centralized platform because there won't be as direct impact towards a specific service, and it won't be as easy to identify cost savings or value of that project. Or in some instances, in the interviews I conducted in both the US and the UK government systems specifically, we found that attempting to build a centralized government platform resulted in a centralized budgeting authority saying, that's great and that's really interesting. who is going to use it so that we can take money in their budget to fund the work that you're going to do. This obviously is a really challenging way to convince people to use a tool that you have not built yet, if they are going to lose money up front and be committed to whatever you are going to provide to them. And so there are real structural challenges to the ways that you would fund a budgeting or budget for a government platform in this way that could indicate that you can't do government as a platform or a shared platform service right away. And you might need to, within a single department, look to just migrate some small programs or services onto a platform ecosystem or on inclusive of cloud infrastructure in a way that can sort of show that there is progress and that there is a need, and then scale up. That's just one example of how that government structure plays out in this way and constrains the type of work that you can do to build and operationalize platforms in the government space. That same structure could really come to fruition in a different way in a different government space, or even in 15, 20 years from now, could be viewed differently in the US or the UK context. Another structure that was really interesting that came up in this research was the idea of dependencies and accountability and ownership. Incentive structures in the government also play out differently than the private sector. And people have a need to stay connected to the infrastructure that they're using because they have final responsibility and accountability to the executive or to their boss when something that they're overseeing breaks. This can make it really hard to want to rely on a shared platform or a shared service, and certainly really difficult to want to rely on or create government as a platform in the way that it's frequently defined. And so, that might be impossible to work around, or it might require sort of a shift in the way that we think about government accountability and incentive structures. There's also this need for political support, of course, and that's going to change what is able to be built and implemented. So really the point here is platforms aren't new to government. We've been using platform-like concepts for a really long time in the government space. And government should use platforms because there is an increasingly obvious economic benefits and savings that can occur when you are able to reduce the redundancies and cost and access the economies of scale and scope that come with leveraging platform ecosystems. But the ways that governments can build platforms can be different from the private sector and has to be done in a really, really intentional way. This is because all of the technical and architectural decisions made while platforms are being designed and developed are really political choices. Developers and policymakers need to be on the same page about what they want a platform to look like, what types of technical decisions need to be made to allow that platform to do or to not do what the government needs, and how they want it to be operationalized such that it's being used in the most correct and efficient way. This work can be really hard, and that's why this research primarily focused on creating some shared language and a shared definition around what a government platform might be and what it's not. And with that, I'd just like to end with that definition being that a platform really is a three-part system of high and low volatility components that are accessed through stable interfaces. And as governments start to coalesce around sort of a shared definition like this, or something else that allows developers and policymakers to have a shared language around what exactly should be implemented, we'll be able to really move forward in thinking through what a government platform strategy should be and how government platforms can improve both service delivery to constituents and internal government operations. Thanks so much. Like I said at the beginning, I'm really interested in this research and I've been working on this for quite a long time, both at the Harvard Kennedy School and with Microsoft, and would really be interested to continue the conversation with folks that are interested or that have questions, and to expand upon what has really been a condensed presentation to fit this conference framework, and would be happy to share the full report or to talk in greater length and detail about how we came to these definitions, who we talked to come to these definitions, and really how we have thought about the technical and operational choices influenced by those government structures that define and constrain what's possible when thinking about building government platforms in the public sector. Thanks so much.